My brother married my unfaithful ex, and after she got pregnant, she demanded I forgive and move on. I used to believe that people could change, but now I've come to a different conclusion. Even the most hardened criminals might turn their lives around, but cheaters? They always cheat. My brother learned this the hard way. He didn't believe me when I warned him that his wife, the woman he adored, was unfaithful. But I knew the truth. How could I be so sure? Because she cheated on me, her affairs were so outrageous that, when I tell you the details, they almost sound unbelievable. To fully explain, I need to take you back a bit. Emily, my ex-girlfriend, now my brother's wife, or should I say ex-wife, cheated on me with him. Back when I told my brother not to marry her because she was a cheater, he didn't listen. Emily clearly married him for his money, and nothing else. I didn't attend their wedding, and that caused a rift between us. Now, years later, my brother wants to reconcile because Emily's pregnant. My mom pushed me to mend things, so I gave them a shot, and guess what? She was still cheating when she gave birth. It was obvious the baby didn't look like my brother, and he ended up getting a paternity test. Now he's seen things with his own eyes. Let me explain more. I was pretty clueless when I dated Emily at the time. I wanted to have a super attractive girlfriend to impress the guys around me. Back in high school, I wasn't exactly the popular kid, so getting that validation meant a lot to me. I even bought a flashy car to show off. Emily was paranoid all the time. She constantly checked my phone, called me to track my whereabouts, and forbid me from talking to any other women, wanting to make her feel secure. I introduced her to my close friends and family, but as soon as my friends met her, they told me she was bad news and warned me to stay away. But I was blind to it all, thinking they were just jealous of me. I didn't want to let go of my friendships over her, so I defended her. Eventually, I introduced her to my parents and my brother, Jake, who's 3 years older than me but acts like a kid. I thought a weekend family trip would be the perfect opportunity to strengthen our relationship. But I was wrong. Emily and I ended up fighting because she thought I was checking out another girl in a bikini. For the record, I wasn't. She slapped me and stormed off. I was angry. But after a while, I started to worry, so I went looking for her. I searched for what felt like hours, but couldn't find her. My parents had gone into town, so I returned to the beach house, thinking she might have gone back there. When I walked in, I couldn't believe my eyes. There she was, half naked with Jake on the couch, doing things I never wanted to witness. I completely lost it. Emily blamed me for the whole thing, saying it happened because I was looking at other women. I wasn't looking at anyone. But I guess she assumed everyone was like her. Jake said he thought Emily wasn't my type and that they'd be happier together. That made me even angrier, and I walked out. I couldn't just let it go, so I did some digging. Turns out, while we were together, she had been flirting with multiple guys, going out to fancy dinners and letting them buy her things. I guess I was just one of those guys. I warned Jake, but he refused to listen, and eventually I gave up. A few months later, I got an invite to their wedding. I couldn't believe my brother was marrying someone he hardly knew, especially someone like her. A gold digger, liar, and cheater. I knew I had to stop the wedding, or my brother would face heartbreak down the line. So, I gathered all the proof I had of her cheating history and showed it to him. But Jake wasn't swayed. He told me Emily had confessed that she just wanted to experiment with different men until she found the perfect one. And he was the one. He was so blinded by her that he actually believed her. Jake's got a good income, and we've always done well for ourselves. We live in apartments owned by my dad, who makes a lot of money from real estate. Jake's supported by our parents, so he doesn't have to pay rent. Emily, though, saw an opportunity. She made Jake throw a lavish wedding celebration, spending a large chunk of my dad's money on it. What's worse is that she invited all the guys she'd slept with about a quarter of the guests being her ex-flames. Others were strange friends of hers and some of my relatives. My family wasn't happy about the wedding. My mom just wanted her to be happy. But my dad hated her and strongly opposed it. Emily's own family didn't show up, as they disowned her for some reason. I was invited, but I didn't go. I didn't want to be part of my brother's wedding, especially when it involved my ex. Jake called me, begging me to attend, but I refused. He accused me of being jealous and not being able to stand his happiness. That was the last time we spoke for 5 years. Recently, my mom told me that Jake wanted to reconcile. I told her that it was up to him to reach out to me if he really wanted that. Jake wasn't just talking through my mom anymore. She said he should reach out to me himself, not rely on her to pass messages, but begged me to give him a chance. I wasn't sure about it, but I agreed to at least try. A few days later, he called. He told me that Emily was pregnant, and that after 5 years, they were still doing fine. It almost felt like he was rubbing it in my face, saying I was wrong about them and that Emily had turned into this faithful wife. He insisted that we should let the past go and reconcile to welcome the new baby into the family. I decided to visit them, thinking it would be good for us to try and move on. They seemed like a happy, normal family, but Jake couldn't resist taking a dig at me, pointing out that I was still single and urging me to at least get a girlfriend. He even thanked me for introducing him to Emily, claiming that I had helped him create this happy family. The whole thing was so IR-surrounding, and I was determined to prove him wrong. I was surprised their relationship had lasted this long. So I set out to dig up some dirt on Emily, and of course I found plenty. It wasn't shocking, though. Emily had cheated on him multiple times over the years. She'd been checking into hotels with other guys, and I had all the proof I needed. I even had screenshots of texts from a guy named John, a 40-year-old man she had a falling out with. John shared with me some screenshots of Emily texting other men too, saying he didn't know she was married and that she used him for shopping and going out when Jake was out of town. With all this evidence, it was clear Emily was still the same cheater I knew her to be, and John's texts made it even more obvious. One day, Emily called me, saying it was an emergency and that she was home alone since Jake was at work. She told me she knew I had been asking around about her and that she would sleep with me to keep her secret from Jake. She invited me into the bedroom, but I immediately turned her down and left. What happened next was something I didn't expect. She lied to Jake, claiming that I had asked her to sleep with me and was blackmailing her. She said I was threatening to tell Jake the truth about her cheating. I explained to Jake that she had called me, offering to sleep with me, but he wouldn't believe a word I said. I showed him all the proof I had that she was still cheating, but he got angry and refused to listen. I tried getting through to him through my mom and dad, but he was having none of it. He didn't want to hear about it, and he grew furious that I was trying to influence the whole family. Eventually, my parents knew the truth too. My mom was troubled by it. She didn't want Jake to be stuck in a bad marriage, especially now that they were having a baby. My dad didn't care much. He thought Jake was being a fool, ignoring all the signs that Emily was a cheater. I had known Jake to be gullible as a child, but now he was just plain stupid. My mom tried talking some sense into him, but Jake was convinced that I had influenced her. He thought she was believing fake evidence I had supposedly planted. This made him even more furious. Eventually, my mom, not wanting to upset him further, decided to pretend that she was convinced that Emily wasn't a cheater, just to get him to talk to her. Meanwhile, I distanced myself from both of them because there was no point in trying to convince someone who didn't want to listen. He was mad at me anyway, accusing me of seducing his wife. A couple of months later, Jake called me again, saying Emily was in labor. Our parents were stuck in another state because of a canceled flight due to bad weather, and Jake was in a complete panic. I didn't know what to do, but I stayed with him. The birth was a long and complicated process, but in the end, Emily and Jake were blessed with a baby boy. I was genuinely happy for them at that moment, but then I saw the baby, and something didn't feel right. There were a few features the baby had that neither Jake nor Emily had, and I knew it couldn't be genetics. The baby's eyes were strikingly different, and I thought he looked like he could have been switched at birth. His eyes seemed to resemble those of a baby of Asian descent. I tried not to jump to conclusions, telling myself that babies all look a bit strange at first, but something inside me was screaming that this wasn't Jake's baby. I stayed with them for a couple of days, and the more I looked at the baby, the more certain I became. It was clear to me that this baby wasn't my brother's. At that point, I almost felt like I had one. The baby was undeniable evidence that Emily had cheated on him. I could see it in my brother's face. He knew something was wrong too, because he'd been acting so strange lately. He didn't have any emotional connection with the baby at all. A couple of days later, Jake came over to my house and we finally addressed the elephant in the room. He told me he felt like the baby wasn't his and confessed that Emily had cheated on him. He also mentioned that they had used protection, but Emily just made some excuse that it had failed. I showed him all the evidence I had gathered over the years, and that night, I proved to him that she had been cheating regularly. Jake sobbed and cried the entire night while Emily kept calling him repeatedly because she couldn't handle the baby on her own. I told him to get a paternity test to make everything clear once and for all. The paternity test results confirmed Jake wasn't the father. That sparked an explosive argument between him and Emily. We were all there, as Jake called us in so he wouldn't have to face her wrath alone. Emily had no valid argument because she was clearly in the wrong, but she tried to play the victim. She accused Jake of not trusting her and of taking the paternity test without consulting her. It was one of the biggest tantrums I'd ever seen. She screamed, threw things, and woke up the baby in the process. Jake decided to stay at mom and dad's house for a few days, taking the baby with him because he didn't trust Emily to care for the child amid all the chaos. It seemed like Jake was starting to get attached to the baby, and so were mom and dad. Meanwhile, Emily wasn't ready to let go. She wasn't willing to give Jake a divorce right away. She initially denied her cheating, accusing Jake of faking the DNA test results. After another test confirmed the baby wasn't his, she resorted to absurd excuses. She tried to claim that the baby was conceived through IVF and that they had used a sperm donor. Of course, she couldn't prove any of her wild claims. The court granted the divorce on the grounds of adultery, but Emily was awarded custody of the child, since legally, Jake had no right to him. She also demanded child support, though the court ruled that she couldn't request that because the baby wasn't Jake's, and she didn't deserve maintenance either. Emily, not taking any responsibility, blamed the entire situation on me. She kept blowing up my phone, trying to convince Jake to take her back because she had nowhere else to go with the baby. My parents, being the good-hearted people they are, offered to let her stay in one of their flats temporarily until she could find a job and a more permanent place to live. I couldn't believe they pitted her enough to do that, but I knew they couldn't leave her on the streets with a baby. Meanwhile, I still couldn't understand how my brother, despite all the red flags, had married someone like Emily. I knew I shouldn't be angry, but I couldn't help but feel that Jake got exactly what he deserved for ignoring all the warning signs. And then there was the issue with my ex-girlfriend, who cheated on me with my brother and now had a child that wasn't even his. After all this, I was considering cutting ties with Jake. I was still angry at him for everything. The way he had treated me, not believing me, and marrying Emily in the first place. But I felt like I had finally proved my point. I showed him the truth about his wife, and now that the truth was out, part of me wanted to rub it in his face and see the regret written all over his face. I know some of you might think I'm being petty, but after everything, I felt entitled to feel that way. Jake wasn't exactly a saint in all of this either. As for Emily, she continued to make poor choices after the divorce. My parents did what they could for her, but they weren't about to let her take advantage of them. It didn't take long before she got into another relationship, but it was the same story. She was using him to get by. When I found out she wasn't even looking for a job, but instead spending her days with a new boyfriend who had moved in with her, I told my parents they were done with her, and they gave her a week to find another place to stay. Her new boyfriend dumped her when she asked him to help find a place to live. Emily ended up living with a friend for a while, but I didn't give up on helping her get a job. I found a cleaner position at a daycare that offered to take care of her baby while she worked. Emily took the job because she had no other choice, but it was strangely satisfying to see her working as a cleaner, especially after everything that had happened. I couldn't believe she thought she could get away with everything and not face any consequences. I feel conflicted about Emily. Part of me feels like she got what was coming to her, but the other part of me feels bad for the baby who didn't ask for any of this. I just hope Emily can stop her cheating ways and raise the child well. Now, as I reflect on everything, I've decided I won't cut ties with my brother completely, but things will never be the same. Emily came into our lives and completely ruined the bond we had. Jake has distanced himself from the entire family since the divorce, and I'm not sure if I should reach out to him or just leave him to figure things out on his own. I'm curious to know what you all think. Should I try to reconnect, or is it better to leave him alone? Thanks to everyone who supported and guided me through all of this. I really had no one to talk to, and your comments gave me the perspective I needed. I finally reached out to my brother, and I'm glad I did. He admitted he felt ashamed for not believing me earlier, and with the divorce and everything else, he wasn't doing too well emotionally. I'm relieved I didn't completely cut ties and instead made the effort to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy for me, considering all the anger I still felt about everything, but I realized that trusting your partner and sticking up for them is one thing, but blindly siding with them and going against your entire family is another matter. At this point, I felt like the older brother. I had to talk to him about the anger and resentment I held towards him, especially after everything with my ex. He apologized for all of it. Cheating with my girlfriend, taunting me for being single, and generally being an ass throughout the years. It's been this way since we were kids. But after marrying Emily, he really crossed the line. He understood where I was coming from, and I think he learned a valuable lesson about not trusting cheaters. As for Emily, I had hoped things would turn around for her, but it turns out she wasn't as good at cleaning as I thought. She slept with the daycare manager, a 47-year-old man, and managed to get promoted to a helper position, but she didn't have the skills for the job. She couldn't even properly care for her own child. Staff members started complaining about how she treated the kids, but the manager didn't listen. Eventually, complaints from parents forced them to let her go. Emily begged them to stay, but they couldn't risk their reputation. The manager ended the relationship with her too, and she found herself jobless and desperate again. After a long search, Emily finally tracked down the baby's father, Ethan, a 39-year-old wealthy man of Asian origin. As it turned out, Ethan was also a cheater, married to a wonderful woman named Sarah, 37, who must have been heartbroken when she found out about the affair and the baby. Emily showed up at their doorstep, and when Ethan denied having any involvement, she called the police. Ethan was forced to take a paternity test, which confirmed that he was indeed the father. However, he wasn't interested in keeping the baby, and they lost the court case when they fought for custody. Emily, on the other hand, wanted to keep the baby so she could collect child support and use it to her advantage. The court ruled that Ethan had to pay child support to Emily, which would ensure that the baby was taken care of while she continued to bounce from one guy to the next. Emily became even worse than I had imagined. She's relying on men to take care of her. But time isn't on her side. She's not going to stay young and attractive forever, and one day, she's going to have to face the consequences of her actions. I just feel terrible for the child caught in the middle of all this. I hope she eventually changes her ways, but for now, her life seems easy. I just know that tough times are ahead for her. My brother and I hear about Emily all the time. It's like the town loves to gossip, and she's earned herself a bad reputation. No decent guy is ever going to want to be with her. Knowing how manipulative and opportunistic she is, the company she keeps isn't any better, and I just hope it doesn't impact the baby in the long run. Emily's situation took a turn for the worse when she overdosed and didn't have help for almost 20 hours. Meanwhile, her baby managed to open the door and wandered out into the streets. He was nearly hit by a car, but thankfully, some neighbors spotted him and brought him back to their house. When they found Emily unconscious, they immediately called the authorities. The child was taken by Child Protection Services, and Emily was sent to rehab. It was discovered that the baby had been exposed to high levels of drugs and smoke, which had caused severe damage to his lungs at such a young age. Jake, feeling sympathy for the child, tried to meet him, and the authorities allowed us to do so. We learned that Ethan, the baby's biological father, was contacted and granted custody after it was confirmed that he was capable of caring for the child. My mom also became attached to the baby and was incredibly worried. The child eventually found stability in Sarah, Ethan's wife. Sarah, a school teacher with a deep love for children, took the baby in as her own. Not only did Sarah adopt the child legally, but she also filed for divorce from Ethan. She had all the evidence she needed, through the child, that Ethan had been cheating and had fathered another child. Sarah received a large alimony payment and was finally free from the man who had betrayed her. She's now raising the child as her own, and I'm happy to see that he's in a loving, stable environment. My mom still gets to visit him since she's so attached to him, but she's never reached out to Emily, not wanting to deal with her tantrums. As for Emily, her overdose landed her in the hospital for several weeks. If she had taken more drugs that day or hadn't been found in time, she could have easily died. When she was found, the baby was malnourished, weak, and severely neglected. His diaper was soiled, and he'd been crying for hours. If he hadn't managed to open the door and wander outside, things might have turned out much worse. Emily was sent to rehab for 6 months and had to pay a hefty fine. If she hadn't paid it, she would have been facing jail time. My brother, feeling sorry for her, visited her in rehab, thinking she'd be upset about losing her child, but Emily wasn't upset about that. She was just angry that she no longer had child support from Ethan. In fact, she seemed relieved that she didn't have to care for the baby anymore. Once she got out of rehab, Emily went straight to Sarah's house, only to find out that she had divorced Ethan. Emily tried to manipulate Sarah into giving her money, threatening that she'd take the baby away from her. Sarah, however, had already legally adopted the child and wasn't having any of it. She called the cops on Emily for threatening her and got a restraining order against her. Emily was warned that if she ever tried to see the child again, she would face jail time. Looking back, I can't help but think about how different things could have been for Emily. She had a good life with Jake, and if only she had changed and been faithful to him, things would have turned out so much better for her. I don't understand why she cheated. Jake was always giving her attention. I think she just craved the attention from multiple men. In the end, Emily ruined her own life, and now she's the one suffering. But her actions didn't just affect her. They impacted her child and Jake as well. I just wish she had been more careful, used protection, and avoided ruining the baby's life. On a positive note, Jake learned the truth about Emily, and in the end, everything worked out. Sarah now has the child, and Emily got what she deserved.